Imagine a room, thick with tension, where every word could determine the fate of millions. On one side, desperate pleas for an end to unimaginable suffering. On the other, unwavering demands, deals made and unmade in the blink of an eye. Why, after months of devastating war, does each new Gaza ceasefire proposal collapse, dashed on the rocks of politics, mistrust, and international ambition? This isn't just about headlines or tragic numbers. It's a brutal game where money, power, and technology collide with history's oldest wounds. And behind every failed negotiation lies a question: who really benefits from this endless cycle of talks, breakdowns, and suffering? Today, we're untangling the economics and geopolitics behind Gaza's elusive peace. Let's rewind to October 7th, 2023, a date seared into the memory of the world. Hamas launches a massive attack inside Israel, killing 200 and taking 250 hostages. The response? Israel's unrelenting offensive on Gaza, promising to fight until all hostages are returned and Hamas is destroyed. More than 58 hostages remain, many presumed dead, while Gaza's population faces devastation at a scale unseen in generations. But the violence on the ground is only half the story. It's in the backrooms of power, from Washington to Doha, Paris to Tel Aviv, where the fate of Gaza is truly decided. Ceasefire negotiations, painstaking, fragile, begin and fail, over and over. At stake, not just lives, but control, influence, and vast sums of money. Why are these negotiations so hopelessly stuck? To understand, we have to step back. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is more than a century old, rooted in territorial disputes, clashing religious claims, and deeply felt historical trauma. Wars in 1948 and 1967, failed peace processes like Oslo, and the bitter status of Jerusalem have left both sides deeply entrenched, each suspicious of the other's motives, each with maximalist demands. Fast forward to today. The latest proposals on the table seem, at first glance, like lifelines. Hamas claims to accept a 60-day ceasefire, a phased hostage release, humanitarian aid, and an Israeli withdrawal. But as Steve Witkoff, President Trump's Middle East envoy, told Axios, "What I have seen from Hamas is disappointing and completely unacceptable." Witkoff insists that Hamas is rejecting the only deal Israel will accept: 10 live hostages, 19 dead, in exchange for a 45 to 60-day ceasefire and the release of some Palestinian prisoners. The deal, he claims, would lead to substantive negotiations for a permanent ceasefire, if only Hamas would accept it. Yet, Hamas says it's accepted a different U.S. deal altogether, one Israel instantly dismisses. Confusing? Deliberately so. Each side is playing to its base, to its backers, and to the international audience watching in horror. Israel, under Prime Minister Netanyahu, sets unyielding conditions for peace: the total disarmament of Hamas, exile of its leaders, and implementation of a plan for relocating Palestinians, all effectively non-starters for Hamas and much of the world. The war, meanwhile, takes an unbearable toll. Over the past weekend alone, Israeli strikes killed at least 55 people, including 36 children. More than 93% of Gaza's children are now acutely malnourished, according to UNICEF. Starvation, disease, and displacement are everyday realities. As negotiations stall, the world watches with mounting frustration and outrage. International actors circle the fray, each with their own agenda. Egypt, for example, floats a staggering $53 billion reconstruction proposal, but only if the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, governs Gaza. Qatar and Egypt push for a long-term truce, demanding Israel commit not to unilaterally resume fighting. The European Union, the UK, France, and Canada condemn Israel's conduct, threatening concrete actions if Netanyahu does not change course. But every outside actor is also protecting its interests. The U.S., still the indispensable power broker, funds both military aid to Israel and the new Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF. Led by Jake Wood, the GHF promises to bring aid to over 1 million Gazans. But its critics, including UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher, warn that the GHF restricts aid and makes it conditional on political aims, weaponizing aid and making starvation a bargaining chip. An emotional observation: how did Gaza, a strip of land barely 25 miles long, become the world's largest open-air negotiation table where every child's well-being is pawned in a high-stakes international game? The actual ceasefire talks are a masterclass in frustration. On one side, Hamas, desperate for survival, demands the release of high-profile prisoners, names like Marwan Barghouti and Ahmad Saadat, and international guarantees. Israel, wary of any move that might let Hamas regroup, insists on tight sequencing. No meaningful prisoner release until most hostages are free, and no ceasefire unless Hamas is defanged. It's a bitter paradox. The very issues that fuel the conflict, distrust, symbolism, and the unending cycles of violence, make peace almost impossible. Khaled Elgendi, senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, put it bluntly. A durable solution requires addressing core issues, not just temporary ceasefires. Yet so far, progress is measured in inches, never miles. The reality is that each party fears not just the loss of power, but the loss of narrative. Hamas cannot be seen to capitulate, lest it lose legitimacy among Palestinians. Israel's government, fragile and beset by hardliners, sees compromise as weakness. Meanwhile, President Trump, watching images of suffering Palestinian children, tells aides he grows more frustrated and upset, but pressure from the White House is met with skepticism on both sides. That deal is on the table. Hamas should take it, Witkoff insists. But with each passing day, mutual suspicion grows. Even the language of proposals becomes weaponized, with both Israel and Hamas claiming their own versions of a U.S.-backed plan, each packaging it to their supporters as a win. The result? Impasse, suffering, and perhaps a quiet benefit for those who prefer the status quo, arms dealers, regional rivals, and politicians who galvanize their bases on endless conflict. Let's not ignore the economics. Reconstruction in Gaza is now a $53 billion business, tied to the question of who will control the territory after the guns fall silent. Donor nations want guarantees. Local power brokers want patronage. Meanwhile, over 1 million people depend on aid that might vanish with the stroke of a pen. And the stakes go even further. The ongoing war draws in new powers, reshapes alliances, and influences the price of everything from wheat to oil. In this high-tech era, surveillance, drones, and cyber operations have made this one of the most technologically advanced and surveilled conflicts in the world. Every day, new technology is tested on the battlefield, and every pause in fighting is a chance for outside actors to retool their own strategies. At this crossroads, the world wonders, is Gaza doomed to remain a playground for competing interests and failed peace plans? Or could a breakthrough, perhaps a surprise, perhaps born from exhaustion, change the course of history? But for now, the clock keeps ticking. The children of Gaza grow hungrier, the politicians grow more entrenched, and every new negotiation begins with hope, dissolves into blame, and ends with the same chilling question: what if neither side really wants peace, at least not yet? As we look ahead, one question burns brighter than the rest. If every ceasefire is doomed before it starts, what truly stands in the way, and who, if anyone, is motivated enough to break the cycle? Stay with us. So, with this tangled web of irreconcilable demands and self-interested international actors, let's look ahead. If everyone is stuck, fearful, or even quietly profiting from the status quo, what force could break the deadlock? First, let's confront the grim reality of what happens if nothing changes. The most likely near-term scenario is what experts call a prolonged stalemate. Negotiations stutter, new ceasefire proposals are tabled, then quickly unravel. Israel maintains its campaign in Gaza, citing the threat from Hamas, and tightens its grip on the territory. Hamas, battered but unbroken, leverages civilian suffering and global outrage to rebuild its influence underground. Civilians, as always, pay the highest price. Over 93% of Gaza's children are now acutely malnourished, a number higher than in any previous conflict in the region. International aid, like that from the U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, struggles to reach those in need. The foundation's head, Jake Wood, admits, "We're trying to save lives, but delivery keeps getting politicized. People are dying while officials debate." The ongoing siege and deprivation breed further radicalization. A new generation, traumatized by war and famine, grows up distrustful of promises from all sides. Every new tragedy is another fuel-soaked match for future conflict. For Israel, the constant state of alert drains its military and economy. For Hamas, the suffering sustains their narrative but comes at the cost of real governance or stability. Now let's imagine the alternative, a breakthrough toward a comprehensive peace agreement. This scenario requires something almost unthinkable today: true compromise. For Israel, That could mean accepting an international guarantee that Hamas's remnants can participate politically in a future Gaza administration, so long as they disarm. For Hamas, it might involve renouncing its maximalist demands and agreeing to a monitored demilitarization in exchange for prisoner releases and tangible reconstruction funds. But who would actually enforce and guarantee this deal? Egypt has a $53 billion reconstruction plan on the table, but only if the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, governs Gaza, a condition fiercely opposed by many in the Strip. Qatar and Egypt have pitched multi-year truces, but these hinge on ironclad guarantees the war won't simply restart at Israel's whim. Former U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff insists, that deal is on the table, Hamas should take it. Yet, as we've seen, even public acceptance by Hamas is quickly dismissed as unacceptable by the other side. The wildcard here is international pressure, but the world's patience is fraying. The US, UK, France, and Canada have all issued stern warnings to Israel: change course or face concrete actions. What those actions look like, sanctions, arms embargoes, legal proceedings, remains to be seen. But the sight of malnourished children in flattened neighborhoods is already testing the limits of global tolerance. There's a third, less discussed path: a regional power shift. Imagine Saudi Arabia and Turkey, backed by vast economic resources and new tech investments, broker a bargain: economic integration in exchange for real political concessions. Such a shift would require both Hamas and Israel to cede some control to outsiders, a bitter pill for nationalist hardliners. But it's not unheard of. Just look at how the Abraham Accords upended a half-century of Arab-Israeli hostility almost overnight, catalyzed by economic incentives and security fears over Iran. But what's the trigger for any of these scenarios? History shows it's rarely diplomacy by itself. Usually it's either a seismic external shock or public pressure that becomes too costly for leaders to ignore. For Israel, that could mean a clampdown on military aid from key allies or targeted sanctions from Europe. For Hamas, it could be popular uprisings within Gaza once people tire of endless privation and see an opening for change. Or a sudden global campaign, think the anti-apartheid movement of the 1980s, that shifts public opinion and makes the old status quo politically toxic for everyone. Right now, though, we're not there. Instead, all signs point to more brinksmanship, incremental suffering, and missed opportunities. So what can we take away from this predicament? First, a lesson in the dangers of zero-sum thinking. When both sides demand total victory, compromise becomes a dirty word, and civilians are crushed in the stalemate. The parties' maximalist demands, Israel's insistence on Hamas's outright destruction, Hamas's call for all prisoners to be released and full IDF withdrawal, are, in practice, mutually exclusive. This is the tragedy of perfect solutions. They are so attractive to hardliners that they sabotage any hope for a good enough peace. Second, recognize the power and peril of international mediation. When outside actors have their own strategic interests, as with the US's plan tying aid to political outcomes, negotiations can become just another battlefield. UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher put it bluntly: restricting aid and making it conditional weaponizes hunger. Starvation shouldn't be a bargaining chip. Third, realize that peace almost never comes from a single grand gesture. Instead, it's built over time, from small, uncomfortable steps. The Oslo Accords, for all their flaws, were possible not because both sides suddenly agreed on everything, but because each was forced to accept painful, public compromises. Today, finding even those small steps, a limited ceasefire, a partial prisoner release, opening more humanitarian corridors, can lay the groundwork for later progress. For the viewer, this conflict is a window into the way entrenched interests and fear can fossilize a crisis. We see it not only in Gaza, but in global politics, in workplace disputes, and even in personal relationships. When every side becomes convinced that any concession is surrender, stalemates can drag on for years, or explode in disaster. So, how can you use this knowledge? First, scrutinize the narratives pushed by all parties. Ask, who benefits from prolonging the status quo? Is what's being called unacceptable truly so, or just a bargaining ploy? Second, when you see coverage of international crises, remember that flashy announcements, deal reached, breakthrough imminent, often mask much deeper, unresolved issues. It's the details, the fine print, that really matter. And finally, hold leaders accountable for the real cost of inaction. Public pressure does work, especially in democracies. The images that frustrate world leaders, like President Trump's reported anger at images of suffering children, are sometimes the only force that can break through hardened positions. If you care, make your voice heard, whether by supporting humanitarian efforts, contacting representatives, or simply refusing to let these stories slide quietly off the headlines. Now let's come back to the mystery at the heart of this story. If all sides benefit from the status quo or fear the costs of compromise, what could actually change things? Here's the secret. The deadlock won't break from the top down, it'll crack from the bottom up and the outside in. When the cost, political, economic, or human, of holding to maximalist demands finally outweighs the price of compromise, leaders will move. This usually happens not with a single shock, but through relentless pressure, public outrage, economic sanctions, growing grassroots demands for peace, or sudden economic opportunities that make the old stalemate unsustainable. It's easy to believe the situation is hopeless, frozen by decades of hate. But history offers hope. The Berlin Wall fell when people, and then leaders, realized change had become less dangerous than stasis. When South African sanctions hit hard enough, old dogmas cracked and negotiations started. In the Middle East, the next breakthrough may seem impossible now, until suddenly, it isn't. Your attention, your voice, and your demands for accountability, even from afar, play a bigger part than you think. So, if you want to see change, don't turn away. Share what you've learned. Demand more from your leaders. And remember, in any story of conflict, the ending is never written until people insist on something different. If you found this deep dive illuminating, hit that like button, subscribe for more untold stories, and let us know in the comments. What do you believe could finally bring peace to Gaza?